Dr. Nolan helped me get into the proving ground test site area.
I was instructor in interpretation of aerial photographs.
Jack is geologist, and there were a couple programs that we did initially. One was to take earth temperature measurements at 3, 5, 10, 20, and 30-foot depths in a series of core holes that they had specified relative to where the atomic bomb site was going to be.
The feeling was that the bombs would make the area uninhabitable, so they wanted to get a geologic map made of the entire area so there would be a value to the survey, who at that time were making a geologic map of the entire U.S.
Well, we're going to start, it's October 23rd, 2019 at the National Atomic Testing Museum, and we're very proud and honored to have two veterans from the early days of the Nevada test site that were there and witnessed some early history. Let's start off by having each of you gentlemen give your full name, please.
Donald Hibbard.
Michael Johnson.
Okay. You folks both have a very interesting story, and we want to kind of detail this in maybe a chronological format. Now, you guys have been lifelong friends, and you have a common thread in that you both were geologists. That was your kind of your life's work and passion. So maybe each of you give a brief statement on kind of what brought you to that career and your early career.
I started college at Caltech, graduated in 1949 as a geologist, and went to work with Conoco, working in Nevada, in central northern Nevada, and in November 5th, I think it was, I was drafted into the Army, so that brought my career as a geologist
so
to a
kind of
temporary
started the Korean War
right.
period. Okay.
Right.
Went to Ohio State University. I have 2 degrees in geology, and I graduated in 1949 and was employed by Amerada Petroleum Corporation. September of 1950, I was drafted and ended up in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, interpreting aerial photographs and teaching interpretation of aerial photographs. And from there I was able to, and Don will explain, to get transferred to the Nevada test site.
Okay. So you both, got kind of forced into the military service, started the Korean War, but you wanted to kind of utilize your geology, your training, and your background. You didn't want to just be an Army regular. And tell us how you guys both gravitated towards that end that brought you to the Nevada test site.
Sort of an interesting story to begin with. I was drafted in November 5th, 1950 into the military and was assigned to Fort Myer, Virginia for reassignment. But before going, Conoco was drilling a well in Nevada, and Dr. Tom Nolan, who was assistant director of the Geological Survey, came out to represent the federal government in our drilling there. He saw our geological maps and so on. I had my boxer dog there that I took with me all my field sessions. He really grew attached to that dog. So anyhow, that was the end of seeing Dr. Nolan for some time. And then I was drafted in the Army after that and was assigned to Fort Myer, Virginia. And I thought, maybe Dr. Nolan, who is just across the Potomac River over in Washington, D.C., can get me some assignment where I can utilize my experience as a geologist. So one day when I had some free time, I crossed the river, went over to the U.S. Geological Survey office and ushered into his big office that he had there. But he was scowling, who is this Army guy coming to see me? And I got up and shook hands and introduced myself. He still didn't remember me. And I said, well, you remember my boxer dog, Cap? He said, oh, Cap.
He
He
remembered your dog.
remembered Cap. He didn't remember me. But anyhow, Dr. Nolan helped me get into the proving ground test site area. And then they needed another geologist, and I recommended Mike, and he came in.
Now, how did you first meet? So you met before you actually ended up at the test site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might just mention that.
I was instructor in interpretation of aerial photographs, and we taught non-commissioned officers and privates and so forth. And Don was in one of my classes, and we got to know one another. When Don left, I said to him, if you need a helper, I'll give you my address. And that's how I got in, through Don's influence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you both ended up at the Nevada test site in mid-1951?
Yeah.
August of '51.
August, okay, the end of the summer.
Yeah.
And what was your assignment? Why did they send you there specifically?
To act as geologists, and there were a couple programs that we did initially. One was to take earth temperature measurements at 3, 5, 10, 20, and 30-foot depths in a series of core holes that they had specified relative to where the atomic bomb site was going to be. That bomb, of course, hadn't gone off yet, but they wanted to know what the earth temperature measurements were there. So we took measurements every day. We plotted them up. Mike and I shared a tent cabin, and we had a drafting table there, and we worked on that drafting table and plotted these earth temperature measurements and turned them over to the powers that be there. And
Now, was that the Atomic Energy Commission or was that the Department of Defense?
well, that was the Atomic Energy Commission, I assume.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were supposed to go to Amchitka Island in Alaska, and
That was one of the choices, one of the two choices, yeah. One of the two choices.
yeah, and
Yeah.
because it was so close to Russia, we ended up going to Nevada. Also, the feeling was that the bombs would make the area uninhabitable, so they wanted to get a geologic map made of the entire area so that would be of value to the survey, who at that time were making a geologic map of the entire U.S. Now, in addition to that, we were charged with finding a place where, if the bombs were set off in that specific spot, that the shock wave and all the data they were assembling would travel away from ground zero, but would be equal. They wanted an area where the alluvium was uniform
Okay.
in the valleys. Just picture when the bomb goes off, then these shock waves and everything else goes out, radiates out from ground zero. We were never able to find an area where the alluvium was equal, because on the east side of Yucca Flat, the outcropping rocks are limestone. And when rainfall comes down and washes that limestone, that is calcium carbonate, and that forms caliche.
Right.
And the caliche was on the east side of the valley. Now, on the west side of the valley were rocks of a different nature. They weren't limestone. So that we determined that there'd be a lot of caliche, a lot of hard digging over here. It might be less important over here. But we never found an area that was was equal in quality and in composition in radiating from ground zero. It was different over here from over here. And I don't know how much attention they paid to us, but that was our conclusion.
Well, of course, in later years, they went to underground testing on those lake beds. When you were there, was there any talk of the possibility of testing underground? At that time, they were still doing the atmospheric test. But I would be curious if you heard any indications in that early period of underground testing.
The
Yeah,
bombs
we did.
came from Kirtland.
Right, and they
And,
were airdrops, their first
And
ones.
yeah, but some of them were on the surface.
Right.
Yeah, because we had one bomb that in Tumbler Snapper where it was a misfire, so it was on the surface because one of the scientists went over to disarm it.
And I remember when Mike and I both went up to the edge of a huge big crater of a bomb that had been set off. How deep the bomb was, I don't know, but there was quite a sizable crater there.
This was a nuclear blast
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
formed the crater?
Yes.
We had protective covering on us and shoes and so on.
Okay.
And we assumed we didn't have any contamination on it. We had to take a shower when we got
Right.
back to camp, but
Well, we want to cover those, but let's kind of back up just a hair and kind of keep this chronological. A lot of people watching this video have a lot of fond memories of early Las Vegas, early days at the test site, the formation of Camp Mercury, which was kind of a base camp. Let's talk about when you first came here. I mean, how did you get here? Did you come on a train or a plane?
Oh.
Did you come through Las Vegas?
We flew from Las Vegas, from Albuquerque.
Okay.
We
To
were stationed
Vegas.
at Kirtland
Yeah.
Air Force Base, and that was a staging area. And from Kirtland, we got orders to go to the test site. And I don't remember how we got there. I imagine we flew.
we flew into Vegas and then drove out or taxied out, whatever.
Do you remember what Vegas looked like in 1951?
Pretty
Yeah.
small.
Pretty small.
There
There
no,
were two.
no strip or no huge big lit up signs like we saw last night.
There were two nightclubs on the strip, Flamingo and Desert Inn.
Yeah.
That was all there.
That was it.
That was all that was there.
And the Desert Inn was a neat hotel. We stayed there a number of times just for relief from the proving grounds to come down to Vegas and go to the swimming pool and have a nice time there.
Great. So you get out to what we call today the Nevada test site. What was Mercury even built yet, the base camp, or what was your first? What were the first things you saw?
We lived in Quonset huts.
Right.
That's all. And there was a hut for the cafeteria, one for sleeping. I think the officers had theirs, and the enlisted men had theirs, and kind of informal. We had jeeps for transportation, and we had a post office because Don and I think, were two of the few enlisted men there. We're the ones who ran the flag up. We were at a military base,
Okay.
so we ran the flag up in the morning, and we took it down at night.
But Mike, as I remember, we didn't stay in a Quonset hut, which is sort of a metal.
Yeah.
We stayed in a tent cabin
Yeah.
with canvas top and wood side, and we had 2 beds
Yeah.
and a drafting table for our drafting work. Our work on out in the field, we'd have to draft up certain maps, and foot lockers we had, and that's. And then I kept my dog Cap there also. There were not many people out there at that time.
And you brought up a good point because you were technically military, and most of the people there were civilians. They were usually contractors and
True.
whatnot, or with the Atomic Energy Commission. So did you you didn't actually have like a commanding officer. You were just there in assignment,
Right.
kind of on your own, and you answered to the civilian departments, Atomic Energy Commissioner, some office there that were giving you your directions of what they needed from you?
There was a Captain LaPointe,
Yeah.
I have him in my book, who kind of managed the enlisted men at the camp, and he was sort of the manager of the Camp Mercury.
Okay.
I wanted to mention that the outstanding scientist that was there was a very famous man. Athelstan Spilhouse was his name, and he had just arrived in America from South Africa. He's gone, but he ended up writing 300 papers on various subjects. But he was a physicist. He was also had other PhD degrees, and he had never been to Las Vegas, and he went. The officers took him to the Desert Inn or the Flamingo, and he became enamored with the crap table. And we said, you know, if there's anybody that can figure out a way to win on the crap table, this is the guy. Because he was a very bright man, very bright. He went there and built a crap table in his hut, and we were all anxiously awaiting their decision on how we could kill him. So one day he said, I figured out a way. So we all gathered around the room, and he had his crap table there and stood on one end, and he said, you know, these officers took me into town, asked me to come up with the answer for the crap table to win money. He said, I figured out a way. So he stood up. He said, he walked around on the side where he says, I'm in the house. So in other words, it's the house that wins. There's no other way of losing. So I later saw him in Aspen, and I ran across him because he had signed his name. And I said, you know, there can't be two Athelstan Spilhouses in America. And I looked at him and I saw him walking towards me. And this is 5-10 years later. I said, Dr. Spilhouse, I'm Johnson of Johnson and Hibbard and Johnson. That's what we were called, Hibbard and Johnson. And he remembered me. And I said, well, we've done this and that. I said, what are you doing now? He said, we're trying to grow food on the edge of the ocean. I don't know how you grow food underwater, but that's what he was attempting to do.
But,
and he was a phenomenal man. He was so brilliant. He just exuded knowledge that he had, and he many articles. And
Do
it's
you
a
think
good
he was
experience.
working with Los Alamos Laboratory at that time? Because there was just one laboratory in that early period that was the main facilitator for the Atomic Energy Commission.
I think the officers in the program at Buster Jangle, they were communicating with LASL, and
Okay.
and they were together, and I think Los Alamos knew where the bombs were that we used to drop there.
Right.
And they probably worked in conjunction with us.
Okay.
I can't imagine them not.
One other item about Spillhouse, I wasn't going to bring this up until later, but late in the time that Mike and I were out there, we were issued this Royal Order of Radiated Desert Rats, signed by Spillhouse and Max George. Anyhow, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek.
Hold that up for
But hey,
the camera.
Radiated Desert Rats is
Can you
what
zoom
we
in
were
on that,
called.
Alex?
Mike got one of these certificates, and I got one, signed by Mr. Spillhouse. He was a remarkable guy, really was.
So you had fond memory. Were there any other famous men, or just
Well,
men?
John, I saw John, well, I didn't see him, but John Kennedy came for one of the bombs.
Okay.
He was a congressman.
When he was a congressman.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go
And,
into the nuclear.
One
Sure.
other famous men, while Mike and I were geologists there, and we'd been working out there for about a year, and we had a visit, a very noted visit from Dr. Tom Nolan, who was the man who recommended me to get into the atomic proving grounds, and I have always been indebted to him, a wonderful man. And he was the assistant director of the U.S. Geological Survey. And then Charles Merriam, who was a professor at Caltech, and Dr. Charles, what's his last name? Charles Longwell, who was at Yale University. All geologists. They came out to visit us and review the geological work that Mike and I had been doing out there. We had a wonderful day spent with these three very noted geologists.
So, it's interesting. It sounds like you had a pretty free rein to do your work. I mean, in subsequent years, even the people that worked at the test site were very compartmentalized. They didn't go somewhere unless they were ordered to go someplace, and you just didn't wander around. But you told an interesting story that you probably got up into a area that in later years became a very famous and actually a very top secret location, which was another dry lake bed that isn't actually too far from the edge of the test site. It was actually geographically part of the test site in the early years, but it eventually became known as Area 51. Can you tell that recollection again?
Good.
Yeah, well, we when we first got there, it was like being parachuted down into an area and looking around, and everything was unknown. There were no publications. We had no maps. We worked from aerial photographs, and as you know, aerial photographs lose scale. They're not very easy to work with when you're trying to determine distance. So we worked from aerial photographs, and the work we did was we looked for publications that had been made, and here was this one publication published by a Nevada geologist, and I put it in my book. It's in my book, and he wrote a article on the Cambrian. The Cambrian is a name given to a certain age group of rocks, and he said there's 6,000 feet of these rocks exposed in Immigrant Valley, or they had a name for it. So we found that on the map, and we went there. And this is, you go up the north end of Yucca Flat, and you go northeast, and there's a gap in there. And we went northeast until we got to that spot where this article had been written. And it's Area 51 is where it is. Mm-hmm. That's the first place we ever saw a rattlesnake. And we ran across them there. And Don and I were able to look at the rocks that were exposed. They were dilted. They were tilted like this, so that they weren't flat, so that you couldn't only see the surface. Since they're tilted this way, you can go along the section and go from one end to the other because they're tilted.
But they went all the way back to the Cambrian period?
Yeah, that's back to the Cambrian period.
Yeah.
So we spent a day there and went back the same day, but that's the only connection we had. One thing we did do, though, is we had named the rocks on the east flank of Yucca Flat. One mountain there was called Banded Mountain, and I think that name may be preserved because what it is the rocks there are different colors, and it's banded.
Is that where there's a granite outcropping?
No, it's
Because I
not
know in
granite.
later years they tested with some of the granite that was in the mountains.
Uh-huh. But these rocks looked like the ones there at Bandon Mountain, so that made
Oh, okay.
a lot of sense to us.
Okay.
So it was rewarding to be able to go to where we went, which later became Area 51. And we went to Bandon Mountain, and sure enough, the colors match. And that's how we named it Bandon Mountain, and that's how we first determined that those were Cambrian rocks.
Okay.
So we did that. So,
One other story about Cambrian rocks. Mike, do you remember one time we stopped in the valley to have lunch, and we were on a little sort of an island of rock out in the middle of the valley, and sedimentary rock there. We had lunch and then got out of the car with a hammer, pulled up the edge of this outcropping rock there, and here was a trilobite, which is an old fossil found mainly in Cambrian rocks. We knew then that was Cambrian. It wasn't what we had called it. I forgot what we originally called it there, but that was Cambrian rock from that point on.
yeah, that one fossil really cleared up this whole section
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
Because then we knew where this was, and that we were looking for a quartzite layer that lies right above the Cambrian. So once we found the Cambrian, then we knew that nearby would be this quartzite layer that's called the Eureka, and that helped put the whole stratigraphic column. You know, a stratigraphic column is a vertical sequence of rocks. The oldest are on the bottom, the youngest are at the top, and each layer has different lithology, different fossil assemblages. So you can find a fossil here, and you can say, well, the rocks below that are older, the rocks above this layer that has this fossil in it are younger.
Mm-hmm.
And we have included that stratigraphic column in the book that we published.
Great.
And it's there. So we use some of the knowledge that we had gotten as being geologists and putting together the stratigraphic column. And that was the first column, stratigraphic column, ever published in Nevada, in Yucca Flat.
Yeah.
We did the initial geological work. The only
For
other
the entire
publication,
test site.
yeah, the only other publication made was a publication on Oak Spring Butte, which was a tungsten mine. And there's an article about a tungsten mine in Oak Spring Butte. Next to that, there was nothing. When we first went there, we started off with not knowing anything.
And there were no roads per se, or, I mean, what was...
Just the main road up the center of the valley.
That's all there was.
But we had Jeep that we could drive, four-wheel drive, and they can take you anywhere.
Now, there's a story, and this may have been after you, but a lot of people have told the story about they were laying telegraph or telephone lines down that road, and they brought in these telephone poles, but they didn't bring in enough telephone poles to do the whole length of the road, so they cut them in two. And the telephone poles were only about, maybe about 10 feet in the air, and it got the name, I think it was Short Pole Road or something like that. I'm not saying that correctly, but do you recall anything like that? That may have come after you.
I don't remember
I
anything
don't
about
remember
that.
so.
Because they probably didn't even have that yet. They probably weren't even laying, telephone lines yet. So you were really there in the early days. So
Yeah.
that's remarkable.
1951 is when it started out there, and we got there August of '51. It was a few people were there, but not many.
So you missed the first test, atmospheric test, the Ranger series, but then you did end up being involved or witnessing a nuclear test or two, correct?
Yes, we did. Sure did.
Okay, you want to
Very
go into
impressive.
that a little bit? Your
Well,
recollections?
there was the shot at Alamogordo that started the nuclear
the
war.
Trinity.
Then there was Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and then there was Ranger, and we were then next after that,
Okay.
and that was Buster Jangle.
Okay.
And
So this is like October, November, 1951.
yes,
Yeah, when
that's right.
those tests took place, right.
Okay.
And there was the observation post, which was midway between the length of the entire proving grounds area, with Yucca Flat at the north end, Frenchman Flat at the south end, and and those were both valleys, of course.
Right.
But right in between there was a topographic high, which was the observation post. Officials that came to view atomic shot, people working there at the site would congregate there and watch the atomic bomb that was going to take place out there 10 or 15 miles out in Yucca Flat or Frenchman Flat. It started out, but
Well, in later days, they called that news knob because when they
Yeah,
opened it
yeah.
up to reporters, the reporters came there and they had bleachers.
Right.
But that's where you got to witness a test or two from.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the observation of the bomb itself was incredible. They issued you these blackout visors where you couldn't see anything. You see the sun up there, just a yellow blob, but you couldn't see anything else. Well, you're waiting for it, 1098 down to 0, and first the heat flow past your whole body, and just the vision of it through the goggles flaming up, and then it died down. You take the goggle off, and this boiling cloud go up, and you haven't heard anything yet because sound travels much slower than sight, of course. And as you're watching this starting to go up, this blast from the atomic bomb hits you, and then followed by boom, 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 echoes off the mountains on the east and the west. The echoes would hit you.
Reverberation.
It was very, very impressive. The most impressive sight I've ever seen is that cloud went up. It was a beautiful sight, really was, with purple in the center, I remember, and ice forming on top and spilling off the edge of the cloud. It was incredible, and I think Mike has got a picture.
This is a
Hold
picture.
that up.
This is a picture of the first bomb set off at the Nevada test site
The Buster
after
Jangle
after
series.
Ranger. This is number one Buster
Okay.
Jangle, and
And that was down at Frenchman Flat?
it was. No, the detonation was in Yucca Flat.
Yucca
We
Flat,
were
okay.
standing in Frenchman
I
Flat.
got you. Okay.
We were 12 miles away.
Yeah, about 12 miles.
We
right.
were about 12 miles away, and we waited for the flash, and when the flash went off, you could feel the heat immediately on your face. It's like an oven. Open the door of an
Yeah,
oven.
it was.
And we're 12 miles away, and you could feel the heat on your face. Sound travels 1,000 feet a second, so the shock wave came 45 seconds later, and it was just awful loud. You know, I don't think we realize what a terrible thing when we came out with nuclear bombs. They are devastating. They are. We should fear an atomic war more so than we do. That would be so destructive. One of the bombs that they set off, it was built on a steel tower. And when we went back to see it, it's gone.
The entire tower.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It had been vaporized?
the heat disintegrated the steel. You can imagine how hot that has to be. And that ball, it wasn't so at these bombs, but the fireball now on some of the bombs that they have is 1/4 of a mile in size. Now I'm talking about the fireball.
Right.
In the fireball, there's nothing that survives. It's gone. It's just gone. So that's the fear, I think, that you need to understand, that it's a terrible, terrible destructive weapon.
So it's very sobering to witness one of those. And
Yes,
Yeah.
it really is.
almost frightening.
We did have one experience. Well, we had several shots from the observation area there of several bombs, but one time they had troops up there, and they had a trench dug, I don't know how many miles it was, back from the atomic bomb site where it was set off. But Mike and I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and got in the trucks with the rest of the troops and went up to the trench, got down in the trench with the guys with our back toward the bomb back here, and all hunched over like this because the bomb was going to go off. They started the countdown, 10, 9, down to 0. Nothing happened. It was a misfire. Misfire. And nobody out. Stay down in the trench. Nobody was about to get out. And we all stayed down in the trench. And a Jeep came up with one of the officers to the tower where the bomb was. He climbed up the tower because the electricity wasn't working anymore. He climbed up physically to the bomb and dismantled it. It must have taken a half an hour, more or less, and then signaled down that he had dismantled the bomb. So the loudspeaker came on, everybody out of the trenches, and all of us poured out of the trenches back to the trucks, except for 4 guys. They stayed down in the trench. They weren't about to move. And I made a comment about that in my report on this. Who knows, maybe today they're still there.
Had to be unsettling. So the troops in most of those maneuvers were stationed at a place called Camp Desert Rock. Was that, do you remember that name or that location?
That was Timber Snapper.
Which was just down a little bit from Mercury, outside the...
South of us.
Now,
Yeah,
were you,
the
but
camp
you
was-
weren't staying in Camp Desert Rock yourself. You
No.
were staying in Mercury, correct?
We weren't there. That was for the Timber Snapper
Okay.
operation.
Yeah.
And that was Camp Desert Rock.
And that was just to house the troops that were involved in the maneuvers that
Right.
were
That's right.
for the...
That's correct. Yeah.
Well, as geologists, were you tasked with any specific duties after the blast to analyze, you know, what the bomb had done to the geology or anything like that, or?
There was just one thing about the geology and the effect, and maybe I can show you this. On
This is our report that we published
this
with
is
the
on yeah,
USGS.
right. I'll
No, you don't-
leave that.
You don't
This
have
copy
that.
of the report.
Oh,
with
wonderful,
you.
thank you.
I have an extra one at home, so I'll keep that one.
Thank
to
you
give
very much.
But this map shows Camp Mercury is here, and the road, I'm looking at it in a bad angle here, but the road comes right up through here, and this is Frenchman Flat out through this.
And here's a playa right
Yeah,
there.
Frenchman Flat Playa. We drove out there one time in a Jeep and stopped at the last minute with a 10-foot wide gash in the playa out there because there are faults out in the Frenchman Flat dry lake area. But anyhow, the main road comes right up through here. The observation post at Yucca Pass, which is a high topographic area, the geology sticks out here, and you're back into a valley here, Yucca Flat and Frenchman Flat down here. And so that's the observation post where all the officials watched the bomb being shot off up in Yucca Flat. And this is the road coming up through here, and approximate locations of some of the atomic shots that we saw here.
This is the way out to Area 52, going right through here.
Right up to
and
that
then get
valley,
there.
right,
It'd be
okay.
about right there.
And with what you brought up, a geological effect, there is one primary fault in this entire map here, the biggest fault that we mapped here, and that extends, and that's what we call Yucca Fault, which is right through here. There's so many lines, it's hard to follow. It's a little bit darker line, but it starts right up here through the pass in the outcrop area, down through the valley, and there's you can see it on aerial photos. Clearly, you can see it down through here. That's Yucca Fault. Up thrown to the west, down thrown to the east, continues on down here through the pass, and then shortly after that it dies out down in Frenchman Flat here. But you can see the location of the bombs very close to the fault, Mike and I speculated, are the bombs that are going to be set off in the subsurface there or anywhere, will they trigger a movement on that fault? Because faults move, you know, and no movement at all on Yucca Flat. And as far as we know, there hasn't been any further movement since we left there in 1952. But anyhow, this will be part of that same report that I'll leave
Wonderful.
with you.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
And of course, in later years, they did almost 824 underground tests.
How many?
Over 800 underground tests
Really?
on those areas.
800 of them,
Yeah.
is that right?
Oh,
Wow.
really?
So, but apparently they never set off an earthquake even then. So,
No,
My gosh, that's it. That's interesting. That's amazing.
Operation, Mike and I called it Operation Pie Pan, where we set up pie pans in different directions from a high explosive shot that was scaled to an atomic shot that was going to be set off there later. And in all directions around, these pie pans were laid out, and then we collected the fallout. The bomb shot off and then fell out in one direction. We'd weigh the amount of material in each of these pie pans and then make a map showing the major part of the fallout was in that direction. And that was to guide them where the fallout would be from atomic shot when it took place.
okay,
That was sort of a minor
that's interesting.
job.
Also, you know, what we did was the first time we've ever determined or measured the effects of atomic bombs. We dropped them on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. There was no measured effects.
Of the fallout you're talking
That's right.
Okay.
So this was the first time that we were measuring the effects of atomic bombs. And what they did is they put a wooden fence here, a steel fence here, plastic fence here, put different kinds of materials, carpeting, plastic, wool, whatever it is. I don't remember that. But we set all this up at different distances from ground zero, and then went in and measured it afterward. And that was the first time that we have ever measured the effects of atomic bombs, which we did at Buffer Jangle.
Okay.
And it wasn't done at Ranger, and it wasn't done in Japan. It wasn't done at Alamogordo. But that was also, I'm sure, done in Tumber Snapper also.
Yeah, they actually built a two-story building out there that was destroyed, of course. I have had friends that I've met later in life, after we left there, who had been out here and spent a year or so out here, and they claimed that they had health effects, and they went to the government. But Mike and I are hanging in here. I haven't had any health effects from it. You
I
haven't, have
haven't
you?
either.
Was
No.
anybody wearing dosimeters or film badges at that
Yeah.
period?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
You did.
And we wore protective clothing and shoes
Okay.
that we wore when we poke around where there was any contamination.
Okay. Very interesting. So, just kind of continuing the story, when did your work wrap up, or did you have a specific set of tasks that you accomplished and then you left, or how did that come about?
Well, our main job became the mapping of the geology, and that culminated when we finally finished all the geological work there, and we went back to Washington D.C. to finish it up, didn't we? And wrote this book. But we reached the end of our term in the Army. I was November, and you were. When were you drafted? September?
Yeah, I stayed a little bit longer.
Yeah,
to
both
finish
of us
the
stayed
report.
longer.
But
But we worked with the U.S.
Finished the
Geological
project.
Survey
Yeah.
for a few months to
Yeah.
finish up this geological
But
report.
this was published 5 years later.
93, 93, wasn't it?
This was published in 1957.
57.
It took 5 years
57.
to compile all the data
Okay.
together. And the USGS did that for us.
Okay.
They proofed it and unscrambled the language and
Right.
did stuff
But that
like
was the first time that geology had been mapped in the atomic proving grounds
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
Well, that was quite a scientific accomplishment then.
The final geologic map that he showed you is that was the first map ever made
Okay.
of that.
Mike
And
and
I'm
I
sure
never-
it's been fine tuned. We did that in 6 months, less than 6 months. To do a job like that, the way the Geological Survey does it, it'd be 5 years.
much longer.
So it really was a good summary of what's there. And I think, luckily for us, it was all exposed. There's no cover. There's no trees or bushes or flowers. It's all bare. And
Yeah.
you can climb those hills and the rock is all perfectly exposed. We went into caves that we found pottery, which was Indian pottery. I think we were probably the first white people to ever climb those hills. I don't know why anyone else would go up there.
Well,
We did name some of the mountains there. Banded Mountain we named, and there were one or two others that we named that just didn't have a name out there.
That's really interesting. I mean, today they have, this building actually houses an archaeological division of sorts that contracts with the Nevada test site to collect those old artifacts and stuff. But I mean, in your day, I mean, there was nobody in place to pay any attention to that stuff. So you really got a rare early glimpse of, as you just said, I mean, you probably walked places that people hadn't been for 1,000 years maybe before you,
That's right.
dating back to the early
Yeah.
Native Americans.
I really believe that. I believe that some of those hills, there's no other reason to go up there because it's hot and it's barren.
But we had an interesting time out there. We never, Mike and I were both oil geologists. We never found a spot to drill for oil. Bad oil possibilities in the Nevada test site.
Well, after this, did your paths ever again cross with atomic testing in any way?
No,
No, I
not for
haven't.
me.
But so you went into civilian life again, and we should probably document that a little bit. I mean, talk about your careers. Did you stay together, or did you keep your friendship going, or?
Mike has got a fantastic story. He is a noted geologist in his accomplishment. Tell him about it, Mike.
Well, when we got out of, when we saw that our time in the military was over 2 years, I went back to see if I could get my job back, and I did. And then I was offered a promotion by another company. Apache Oil Corporation was the first company that ever started a drilling fund. We all know what a mutual fund is. A mutual fund is you give your money to a company and they invest it for you in the stock market. A drilling fund is you invest your money in drilling oil wells. So some drilling funds make a lot of money. Most of them don't because oil is hard to find. But at the time, we were talking about 80% tax bracket. I don't know if you remember, but back in the 50s, the income tax went up as high as 85 and 90%. So you were talking about $10 tax dollars. So if you got an investor who invested $1 million, he's actually investing $100,000. So you don't need to find $1 million worth of oil. You need to find maybe half of that, and he's making a profit. It was a drilling fund. Apache invented it, and it became worldwide. And I was with Apache when that happened, and I was involved in the Rockies, manager for Apache. And then we ran into hard times. I won't go into the details, but I started my career as an independent in 63, pardon me. And I've worked mostly in the Rockies, and specifically in North Dakota and Montana. There's an area up there that's called the Williston Basin, and it's an oil-producing area now, but it wasn't when I started my work there. And to make a long story short, I was with the company that discovered the first oil well in the Williston Basin. And later on, and this only happened 10, 15 years ago, we did something in the oil business that would be likened to what computers did for the world. It revolutionized everything. You know, I've got my cell phone here. That's an encyclopedia. That's what we did in the oil business. We invented horizontal drilling, where you can drill vertically and turn a bit and go out horizontally. Okay. You can drill 2 miles deep, turn a bit and go 2 miles away, and you're staying in the layer of rock that has the oil in it. So you're exposing this much to the well below that you were with the vertical. There's a guy sitting up on the surface in a doghouse with a mouse and a screen, and he's directing that bit that's 5 miles away, 9,000 feet deep, and he can hit a target that's 250 yards in diameter. It's a phenomenal discovery.
That really revolutionized the
absolutely
drilling and oil business.
So using that, we were able to, I was able to get involved with a group, and we discovered what has become the second largest oil field in America. It probably ranks as around the 15th largest oil field in the world. It covers over 6 million acres, and it has reserves of about 10 billion barrels. Our total reserves in America are about 100 billion barrels. So this is 10% of the oil in America is in partial field. It's called partial. I was very fortunate to be involved in that. I didn't discover it. You never discover an oil field by yourself. It always takes people and equipment and money. But I was in the group, and I profited from
But Mike did the geology that led to that discovery. And just to add a couple of notes, Mike had the idea, went to a couple guys that he knew that had money, and they leased, this story I heard, Mike, they leased 40,000 acres, took it to every company in Denver to get them to drill this idea that Mike had, because here was a play, there hadn't been no Bakken oil field for 100 miles away over in Montana, but in North Dakota there weren't any Bakken. Bakken is one of the formations. And they got to EOG, and EOG took the idea and accepted this leased acreage, drilled where Mike recommended, and came in with a well that produced 1,400 barrels a day. And that was the beginning of this Bakken play. And Mike became a famous geologist because of that.
He's expanding a little bit more than reality.
It had to be exciting times, though.
Michael, I want to commend you and your staff because you've put together a beautiful museum here. Yeah. And I've been coming here for off and on for a lot of time, but I never knew it was here. And I'm fortunate that I saw it one time a year ago, and I walked through it, and then I got to know you. But you've compiled a wonderful group of data here that's interesting. John ought to take time to go through it too.
Yeah.
But it's well done.
We appreciate that. a lot of ground.
One
What-
little story I have. In Camp Mercury, we were right in the middle of the desert. They scraped off all the sagebrush and everything to make the camp there. It wasn't much of a homely place. I thought, there's not a blade of grass out here. So right outside the entrance to our tent cabin, I had a little area about 2 feet by 2 feet, scraped it up, brought in some grass seed and planted the grass seed and watered it every day. And we had the only lawn in the entire camp.
Where did you get your water from? Was it trucked in, or was there even a well in it?
I don't remember
I
where the
don't
water
either.
came from.
I would bet they drilled a well because there is water in the subsurface. But I don't know.
Interesting.
We had water from the time we were out there.
Well,
Well, it's been real nice getting together with you today, really has.
we appreciate your time and the service you two gave to your country. And you both had remarkable careers. It's a real honor to hear these stories. I mean, this is why we're here as a museum, to document this stuff and honor people like you two. And it was our pleasure to have you with us today.